Hi, and welcome back to the podcast Novelty Novelist. I'm your host, Jennings, and today we're continuing our series of Diving Deep. This is our second podcast with Truman Capote, so if you haven't listened to our first one last week, then you should go back and listen to it. But before we start, I want to thank Shark Vacuum for sponsoring this video. For those of you who don't know, Shark Vacuum is one of the most powerful vacuums in the world right now. It can clean up messes from Cheerios to dirt to just about anything, and it can be used on any surface. The best thing about the Shark is that it has multiple attachments which can be used to clean different areas of your house. I love to use mine to clean my blinds, and I also vacuum my floor every day. The Shark Vacuum is on sale right now for $3.99. Thanks again, Shark, for sponsoring this video. Now back to our podcast. Truman Capote was on the podcast last week, and we talked more about the historical aspects that influenced his book of In Cold Blood. But today we're going to talk about more of the intent behind his writing.
Hey Jennings, thanks for having me back. It seems like the last podcast was a success, and it seems like some of those questions that were unknown were answered. So I kind of hope to do the same thing today, but I guess today we're more focused on the intent of writing In Cold Blood and the intent behind some of the themes and the symbols that are present.
So the first question our audience asked is, what was your intent in writing in the true crime genre? Did you know you were going to create this movement after? Why that genre in particular?
Yeah, so the true crime genre at the time had not been super popular, so I thought that maybe by using it, it would be a new and upcoming genre. But when I first decided to write in the true crime genre, it was because there were some missing details from the murder. I didn't exactly know the dreams they were having, the clothes they were wearing all the time, the conversations they were having within their house. And since I couldn't find all of these details, I didn't want to just leave the book with random gaps. So I knew I had to fill in those gaps somehow, which is where the true crime genre came into play. And I really wanted people to appreciate this work. And I knew that through using this genre, I would draw a lot of attention to the work. And I just think it's super interesting that, despite the fact that I didn't know all of those details, I was still able to fill them in with somewhat reasonable answers. And I think that's truly part of the true crime genre is it can't be something unrealistic. It is realistic so that it does seem like the whole book is nonfiction. The true crime genre just allowed me to incorporate both nonfiction and fiction aspects while still keeping that nonfiction feel to the book.
And I definitely think you can feel like the nonfiction and the fiction in the book, but it just feels so cohesive that it's really interesting. But that leads me to my next question, which is how did In Cold Blood create a commentary on the American dream?
Well, I know I touched on the American dream a little bit in the last podcast, but it really was very important during the time. It was something that nearly every family in the U.S. was striving for, and the Clutters were really the perfect representation of the American dream. And seeing information on them, I kind of had the thought that they were a representation of the American dream, but when I really got to studying their family and their lifestyle, it became very clear that, yes, they were what people saw as the American dream. Although, when I really did start finding out more about them, I began to question how perfect the Clutters really were. The mother, turns out that, as y'all read in the book, she had some mental disabilities. The son was not what the family had wanted him to be. And so, yes, they lived behind that white picket fence in that pretty house and with two seemingly perfect kids and two seemingly perfect parents, but once you get to know them, it really wasn't that way. And so I hope that this would spark the idea that the outside may seem perfect, but on the inside, it's really not that perfect, and their family could be a disaster. So you never really know what's going on behind that white picket fence. And the murder just goes to prove my point even more that they weren't so perfect, because if they were perfect, then their life would not have turned out like this.
That's such an interesting thought on the American dream. But what was your purpose in including the perspective of the criminals?
So when I first started the book, I wasn't exactly sure if I was going to switch perspectives between the criminals and the Clutter family in their town. But once I really started my research, I decided that I did want to know more about the criminals. And it turns out that Perry and I really did develop an interesting relationship. I knew that understanding who the criminals were would give me a better way to write the book. And I knew that if the readers understood who the criminals were, it would add a lot more understanding and depth to the book itself. So when I switched perspectives, it did allow the reader to go along with the criminals and understand more about who they are. And it gave more examples of who the criminals were and how odd and different they really were. It wasn't just me saying, oh yes, they did this and that, but the reader truly got to experience what they did. And Dick and Perry, as you could probably tell, were not mentally stable, and they did face many issues, whether that be in their early life or currently in their life. And I felt that maybe taking readers through their daily life would add more understanding and insight to their lives, so they would understand where that mental instability came from. So as a reader, do you feel like you now know more about Dick and Perry having an inside perspective to their life?
I do feel like I learned more about them, and I could sense their intentions, and it was easier to pick up on their ways of manipulation and each person's personality. And the switching of perspectives is what made the book really incredible for me, because it exposed something so new and so exciting, which I think this book is so important for literature because of the way it proposed that. And that's all we have time for today, but I want y'all to join us on our final episode, as Capote will be discussing the significance of his works and how they have a lasting impact on the world we're on. So thank you so much, Capote, for your time today, and we can't wait to hear from you next week.
Yes, well, this was lots of fun again. Thank you, Jennings, for having me back, and I guess that I'll be back again in about a week for the final episode, so thanks so much.